because each breast will produce two different types of milk. There is foremilk and there is also hind milk. Now, when I say breastfeeding, do you hear nipple feeding? No. And so you're literally giving your energy to your baby. And if you don't have the energy, breastfeeding is an impossible experience. Breastfeeding is not supposed to hurt long term. Not only are you learning to breastfeed, but the baby also is learning how to breastfeed. Hey girly pops, it's Cam, your self-proclaimed virtual bestie, and today I will be talking to you about breastfeeding. I have now been breastfeeding for a year, and over the year I had to research, talk to my midwife, and be besties with ChatGPT as I was trying to figure out everything about this journey. And there were no YouTube videos that really compiled all of the things that I'm going to share with you today. And I have also had an unsuccessful experience breastfeeding, and I was able to learn from both of these experiences. If you are a breastfeeding mom or you are pregnant and you plan to breastfeed and you're not sure what that's going to look like, please keep watching. So first off, I thought that it would be interesting to start this video by talking about why my first attempt at breastfeeding was unsuccessful. Let's talk about how taxing of an experience breastfeeding truly is. Breastfeeding is an energy transfer spiritually, but also quite literally, from the mother to her baby. When you're feeding your child, you are actually burning calories and giving calories to your child. Calories, a unit used to quantify energy. And so you're literally giving your energy to your baby. And if you don't have the energy, breastfeeding is an impossible experience. If you've watched my videos, you know that my first experience with postpartum was a difficult one. I wasn't eating as well. I did not have the actual hands-on support from my husband the way that he has been showing up this time around. And that is because we have had so many conversations prior to having our second baby in terms of what postpartum was going to look like this time around. We are also a lot more mature, and so we plan things a lot differently, making breastfeeding possible. And so the support system that was available to me has definitely contributed to me being able to breastfeed my daughter. I've had hands-on support from not only my husband, but also my mom and his mom, and that has made a world of difference in my experience breastfeeding my daughter. Now, I did manage to breastfeed my son for about a month the first time around, but I ended up finding out that he might have had a tongue tie, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to follow up on getting it snipped on time, and I was just struggling mentally. And I did not have the mental or even physical availability to continue breastfeeding. And so I had to cut that experience short. But I did pump, and I ended up giving formula a few months later. I want you to know as a mom that if you're watching this video and you're struggling to breastfeed, just like me, you can opt for formula. And formula does not mean failure. As a mom, you just have to be available and well to take care of your child, if it's through breastfeeding, pumping, or formula feeding. Now let's get into the knowledge that I have acquired through 1 year of breastfeeding my daughter. At the beginning of my journey, there are a few things that I wish I had known, and I'm going to share them with you today. Let's get into what breastfeeding really means. Now, when I say breastfeeding, do you hear nipple feeding? No. Breastfeeding is actually getting as much breast tissue in the baby's mouth as possible. That is something I didn't know. And so considering that the baby is tiny, so is their mouth. Breastfeeding tends to get easier after 6 weeks because that is when their mouth fully develops and can open wide enough to actually get as much breast tissue into the mouth as possible. Let's do an exercise together. If you were to put your tongue at the roof of your mouth, you would feel that the first half of the roof of your mouth is very hard. You have a hard palate there right by your teeth. Your nipple is supposed to land at the back of the mouth, where when you touch the roof of your mouth, in the back you can feel that it's softer tissue. If you're breastfeeding and you see the shape of your nipple changes after a feed, you know that your nipple is not landing in the right part of your baby's mouth. that's when breastfeeding can get very, very painful. And in the first few weeks, usually the baby doesn't have the range to get as much of that breast tissue in. And so your nipple lands in that first area of the roof of the mouth. That's what makes your nipples crack, bleed, and you stick your nipple out of the baby's mouth and it's kind of like lipstick shaped. That is so painful. I have experienced it with both of my kids, but one thing that I can say is knowing that breastfeeding was going to get easier once their mouth was going to get a bit bigger is what gave me hope to go past 6 weeks. And you will see that as the weeks go by, the latch starts to perfect. You have to understand that not only are you learning to breastfeed, but the baby also is learning how to breastfeed. And so their latch is not going to be perfect 100% of the time, but as the weeks go by and both of you and your child go through the learning curve of breastfeeding and their mouth starts to widen, you're going to realize that you're less stiff when breastfeeding and you can start relaxing because the percentage of time that you're going to have a successful latch is only going to increase. And so knowing that after 6 weeks, my breastfeeding experience was going to get easier, kept me going. And as I was approaching that 6 week mark, I was noticing, oh my gosh, okay, her latch is good 50% of the time. Oh, it's increased to 60% and 70% and so on and so forth, until I didn't even get to realize that 100% of the time, her latch was fine and it felt comfortable to feed. Breastfeeding is not supposed to hurt long term. And so that is one thing that I learned about the natural development of breastfeeding. Now let's talk about latching. So when you're latching the baby onto your breast, you want to make sure that their head and their spine is in a straight line. If the baby's like this while breastfeeding, their latch is going to be off. So you want to get into a comfortable position and always make sure that the baby has a straight line. If you were to put like a stick behind their head and all the way down to their back, it would be a straight line. So whether you're breastfeeding them in a cradle position, in a football position, or whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that there is a straight line there because that's actually going to help their latch. I'm going to try to put some images on the screen to kind of help you visualize that because I did have a hard time picturing that when it was my first time around breastfeeding, but that does make a world of difference. Also, as I said, you want to get as much breast tissue as possible into the baby's mouth when they are feeding. And so try to catch them during a yawn or during a cry and just shove the boob in the mouth. Like that's the best way possible. Or you can also put your nipple on their nose. They're going to open their mouth like up. That's going to allow for them to open their mouth wide enough to get as much of that breast tissue as possible. Now let's talk about the things that could potentially go wrong, because sometimes you have the latch right, you have waited past 6 weeks and things are still like super painful. And that may be because of one of two things, or maybe both, who knows. There could be thrush. Thrush is a bacterial infection, or actually it is like a fungal infection, if I'm not mistaken, where it really stings when you breastfeed, and it hurts. It's painful for the mother, and it is also painful for the baby. And you could identify thrush by noticing if your baby has a white coat. It looks like hardened milk on the tongue of the baby. Usually when you're breastfeeding, you shouldn't see a white coat on your baby's tongue. Unless you're supplementing with formula, the baby's tongue should be pretty pink. But if you're seeing that there is a white coat of like hardened milk on the tongue and it really stings when you're breastfeeding, it might be because of thrush. Mind you, I am not a lactation consultant. I am not a doctor. I am not a midwife. This is really something that you have to look into with a healthcare professional. Another reason why your baby may be having a hard time perfecting their latch, it could be because of either a lip tie or a tongue tie. Essentially, when you're breastfeeding the baby, you want to make sure that their lips are open, like phalanges, and also the positioning of their tongue. It's really hard to tell, but a lactation consultant will be able to analyze the latch of your baby and tell you if you might qualify for either a tongue tie snip or a lip tie. Another thing that I want to talk about is if ever you are suffering and your nipples are cracked and bleeding and you don't know what to do in order to recover, because for those first few months, the baby is pretty much attached to you. So you barely have time to recover before the next feed. Honestly, I can't say that there is a one size fits all remedy to healing your potentially cracked and bleeding nipples. But what I can say is there is an ointment. It is called the Newman ointment, and it is an ointment that is used for all different types of injuries, not just related to breastfeeding journey, and that really goes a long way. I've also tried the silverettes. The silverettes kind of look like a nipple shield, but they're made out of silver. For me personally, it wasn't something that really helped with my journey because I felt like my boobs just kept producing milk. It was always very moist in there, and so it didn't allow for healing. I felt like the ointment, as well as kind of staying shirtless, really helped me with healing. But to each their own. I suggest that you try both and you see what works for you. It definitely is a learning curve, and you're gonna have to try different things, honey. In terms of your milk composition, this is something that I also wish I knew, because when I started breastfeeding, I was really caught off guard by the whole witching hour thing. If you don't know what the witching hour is, it's when your baby is going through a growth spurt and they literally won't leave you alone. You could spend hours and hours feeding your child and they seem to never be full. The witching hour is designed to help you produce more milk. So as your baby grows older, they will require more milk from you. And so during those evenings where they are nonstop feeding, it's causing your body to nonstop produce milk so that as they grow, you have enough milk to supply to them. And during those witching hours, I kept switching my baby from one breast to the next breast. But the thing is, you want to make sure that you empty one breast at a time, because each breast will produce two different types of milk. There is foremilk and there is also hind milk. Foremilk is the before milk, if you'll say, and that milk is a lot more watery. And it is meant to hydrate your baby. So let's say your baby is thirsty and they need a quick feed. Foremilk is the first milk that you're going to feed your baby. The hind milk is the thicker milk, is the creamier milk, is the milk that contains the most fat, and that's supposed to keep your baby full. So when you start feeding on one boob for 5 minutes and then you switch to the next boob, your baby is only getting foremilk, and that will not keep them satiated. So it's important for you to keep the baby on the same boob for as long as possible so that they can get as much of that hind milk as possible to reduce feeding time. When I first had my daughter, she could stay on my boob for like an hour long, and she would kind of fall asleep, and I didn't know if she was actively eating or if she was just suckling for comfort. And so that's also another thing to pay attention to. When the baby is eating, you will actually hear gulps. You will hear the baby swallowing, and that will give you a good indication as to whether or not you're having a successful feeding session. And just so you know, the witching hour is related to many things, not just growth spurts. It could be related to nervous system regulation. At the end of the day, when the baby is first born, they do need to be on their mother, smell their scent, hear their heart rate, and have that skin to skin to regulate their nervous system. Skin to skin. Can we talk about skin to skin? Skin to skin is such a game changer, and I feel like being postpartum, you kind of forget how crucial skin to skin is. You want to check, like, is the baby well fed? I don't understand. I just fed her 30 minutes ago. Why are they crying? Is their diaper soiled? No, I just changed her. They're still crying. You don't understand why. Skin to skin really goes a long way. Like, skin to skin will regulate your baby's nervous system so quickly. Don't sleep on that. I did kind of speak about the energy transfer that happens between a mother and their baby during a breastfeeding journey. Let me know if you want another video about the spirituality behind breastfeeding, because there's a lot that I have learned during my experience breastfeeding that no one talks about. The spiritual aspect of breastfeeding. There is so much to gain for a mother when breastfeeding their child. Like, I wish I had known that my first time around. I feel so connected to my baby, and it's a true bonding time, but I also learn a lot. And I do get a lot of downloads during breastfeeding, especially at night. I don't know if it's because I'm already spiritually inclined, but if you meditate while breastfeeding, you will get a lot of answers. Anyway, that's a topic for a whole other video. Now, time to outro this video. I do want to say that if you do not have a support system, breastfeeding is going to be very difficult. I'm just being honest. Breastfeeding requires you to be available full time. As I said, when I started breastfeeding my daughter, she could be on the boob for like an hour straight because her breastfeeding technique was not developed. And so she needed to be on me for a long time, not only to regulate her nervous system, but even to get a full feed. And I was wondering if I was doing anything wrong. And that's when I did the research and I found out about the fore milk and the hind milk. But essentially, your baby, when they're a newborn, needs to eat every 2 to 3 hours. Imagine, my baby was on my boob for 1 hour at a time and eating every 2 to 3 hours, meaning that out of 24 hours, she could be on my boob for 8 to 12 hours. That's a full-time job. So if you're postpartum, you need the rest, you're also breastfeeding, you don't really have time to cook. You don't really have time to clean. You might not even have the energy to get up and get yourself a bottle of water. So you really need to have someone present to make sure that you eat because you may forget, to make sure that you bathe because you may forget. You may not find the energy to do that. So I'm just saying this because if you do not have the support system, which in my experience was a reality for me the first time around, you may want to consider formula feeding or pumping. Pumping is a whole sports of its own. But formula is not failure. And I want you to know that I had to formula feed my first within the newborn stage. And it was very disappointing for me at first, but I do realize that formula is what kept me afloat at the time, or almost. It's what kept me well enough to take care of him. It's what allowed for me to share the task of feeding him with other members of my family. So if you do find yourself in a predicament where you feel like you don't have a choice but to formula feed, there is some beauty in you having that option. And it's okay to formula feed as long as you are doing the efforts necessary to maintain your well-being and to stay alive and to be available to take care of your baby. That's what matters more than whether it's breastfeeding or formula feeding. I had to experience motherhood a second time to fully benefit from breastfeeding. And so if you do plan on having more children, maybe the next one will be breastfed, who knows? But truly just focus on your well-being today. That's what matters more than anything because your baby needs you to be well. This is your friendly reminder that your baby needs a stable mother more than to be breastfed. I believe that all options should be considered and you shouldn't lose your sanity over breastfeeding your child. You need to be strong in order to take care of your children. And so I think that that should be at the top of your mind during this postpartum season of yours. I hope that you learned something new in this video, and if you did like the content, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell because there will be more videos coming. I am so happy that you tuned into my channel, and I hope to see you next time. Mwah!